Hello and welcome to the OT meeting room. I'm your host, Deborah Battistella. In this video, we're going to talk about applying evidence-based interventions to practice. What is the struggle? This is a real problem for a lot of occupational therapy practitioners, and I hope to help us move through that and to start using evidence-based interventions for our stroke clients. Before beginning, please understand this information is for educational purposes only. It's not provided as formal education, a professional service, medical advice. It's also not intended to be a substitute for formal education, diagnosis, or treatment. I want to share these slides with you. These are slides that I created for a continuing education course that I gave. And this information is so relevant that I think it's important for us as clinicians to understand. The information referenced is from an article by Juckett, Wengard, Feit, and Griffin from 2020, and I will provide the article title and the link below. They begin by talking about 3 interventions that have high quality evidence to improve upper extremity functional recovery following stroke. These are constraint-induced movement therapy or constraint-induced therapy, mirror therapy, also known as visual. Well, I misspeak a lot, so I'm just going to keep going along here. Mirror visual feedback and mental practice, also referred to as mental imagery. Best practice advises using evidence-based interventions to promote recovery and improve function, decrease disability, and improve quality of life. This article tells us that it takes 17 years to implement scientific discoveries into clinical practice. There's other research out there that tells us it takes 19 to 21 years. Now, I know this is true because I was very interested in constraint-induced movement therapy when I was going to OT school. And in fact, that was my master's project was on constraint-induced movement therapy. Now, I graduated from OT school in 2006, and this is still not a top used intervention for stroke survivors. So what does the research tell us? Well, first, we learn there are some barriers to implementing the evidence. These barriers can have to do with the characteristics of the intervention itself, fidelity being one, where inconsistent adherence occurs to the intervention protocol. This is something that I do think we as occupational therapy practitioners can play a positive role in by helping to develop clear protocols and strategies for clinicians to implement the evidence, and then strategies to help with client follow through. Also, some interventions are complex and they're not adaptable. And we know how important simplicity and adaptability are to our practices. So likely we will stay away from those interventions that are not easy to implement or use. Now let's look within the clinical setting. There are a lot of barriers to overcome here, and some clinics have all of these, some clinics have none of these. And if you have one of those clinics where there aren't a lot of barriers, I'm happy for you. Now, lack of clinical staffing can be a problem. Lack of an intervention expert. So having someone who truly understands the intervention and can help develop a protocol, a strategy for implementing that is really important. Having someone that knows about the intervention so much that they can help answer questions that clinicians have when they come up, because questions are always going to come up. We will never know everything that we need to know about any topic. High cost of some evidence-based interventions. So it's really important to know your clinic budget and the clientele that you're serving, the type of practice that you have, and understanding that if an intervention that you want to use, it has a high cost associated with it, that might make it more difficult to implement. time constraints, and other logistical challenges. A lot of clinics have such high productivity standards right now that it can be very difficult to learn about an intervention and then take the time to apply it. So being mindful of your clinic, and if you're a clinic leader, I do encourage you to think about ways to overcome these barriers, especially around time. The time to learn is, there is a real time part of a learning curve, and being able to understand something well enough and create the proper supports around it to help others implement it. Like the time, there is time required. And my wish is that we can all change our relationship with time in such a way that we have a good relationship with time so that we provide the best care for others. And then lastly, having inadequate equipment. I don't know about you, but I have worked in clinics where we haven't had the equipment needed to do our jobs, and that really does get in the way. And so if that's something that is going to get in the way of applying research to practice, then maybe think about ways that we can overcome that, or that you can overcome that. Okay, other barriers include characteristics that we as clinicians have: lack of knowledge that an intervention even exists, and decreased confidence in using the intervention. So if you've been practicing for a while or you're working with someone who's been practicing for a while and they haven't heard of an intervention, that is problematic. And this is the reason that we have continuing education requirements, so that we can stay current with what the research is saying and then apply current interventions to our practice. We do ourselves and our clients a disservice when we don't remain current. So along with knowledge, if we don't have knowledge of something, it's really hard to be confident in using the intervention. And we always tell our stroke survivors that practice makes progress. Well, the same is true for us. The more we learn about something and the more we practice applying it to our practice, the greater we feel competent, and then confidence improves in using that intervention. Another one that I think is interesting is difficulty forming habits using the new intervention. This has happened for me and my clinical practice, and I'm pretty sure that this happens to you too, especially if the research is showing that. Our brains are designed for efficiency and energy conservation, and that is why we become so habituated to doing certain things. And so if difficulty forming a new habit is a real part of your practice, then I think an easy way to overcome that is to use some of the strategies that we suggest to our clients, like visual cues or auditory reminders on our phone, to use that. I love having a buddy to work with who reminds me or plans with me that I want to start something new. And then lastly, having a viewpoint of an intervention that is less than favorable. And that often happens when we don't understand something. So adopting a mindset of growth, like Carol Dweck has an excellent book, Fixed versus Growth Mindset. Really having that growth mindset and being open to learning about something can help us understand something better, and then maybe change our opinion of an intervention, especially if there's a lot of intervention, especially if there's a lot of evidence behind it. Okay, let's talk about facilitating success, facilitating implementation. So the research tells us that within our clinical settings, having those resources available to us is really integral to adopting research into practice. And then having a knowledge expert, perhaps having a champion role, that person who is interested in the research, who loves combing through the research and then creating protocols and developing resources for support. Having those supports and guides created and available online so that clinicians have something to refer to, and then having information available to give to your clients. And having electronic education module. Wow, that was really hard to say. Having electronic education modules is really important, because if people have access to education that they can review during work, they're more likely to develop their understanding and remember how to apply the information. Lastly, on this slide, we're going to talk about the relationships that are essential for developing a new program. You have to include all of the relevant stakeholders. So I encourage you to identify who those stakeholders are in your organization. I will suggest that management and higher level leadership be involved, as well as those clinicians who are going to be using the interventions and the clients that you want to use the interventions with. So if it's stroke intervention, which is a lot of what I talk about on this channel, include stroke survivors in your conversation. They have a lot of information to share with us. Also, the research tells us that having clear support from management is needed, hence having them as part of your conversation and planning committee. Also, ongoing organizational communication. Having good communication is key. Make sure that you have a clear communication strategy and that everyone understands the importance of timely communication. We can really get tripped up with things if people aren't communicating with us. So what are your results going to be? Well, if you have a good strategy, you're going to have increased consistency in implementing the evidence-based interventions. And once you start having more and more evidence-based interventions in your clinic, you're going to have more favorable opinions around routinely adopting those evidence-based protocols. Now, interestingly, the research tells us that the most common predictor of actually adopting evidence-based interventions is the extent to which an occupational therapy practitioner finds value in a particular intervention. They have more enthusiasm and support for that intervention, and they're going to be your promoter of adopting that intervention in your clinic. Enhancing knowledge is key. So having that strong working knowledge of the intervention, that's been a theme through this presentation, and having clinical application understanding. So once we have knowledge of the intervention, we then have to take that knowledge and apply it to practice. And sometimes we get stuck with that too. So how can we move through it? Host workshops, have mentorship consultation available, and then those educational materials. Make sure that those are available to your staff as well. And then work for an organization that has initiatives that support implementation. So if you're working for an organization, or if you own an organization and you don't have a clear initiative to support evidence-based practice, I suggest that you consider creating that initiative. That's an excellent one to create, and then have a plan for follow through. And your staff will thank you, and your clients will thank you. So what can you do next? Watch part 2. The next video is going to be about using mirror therapy for upper extremity recovery. We're going to talk about the possibilities for clients and practitioners. And you can also check out the Noggins and Neurons Brain Injury Recovery Simplified podcast. This is a podcast that I co-host, and we talk about all things brain injury recovery. Thank you for watching. I hope that you make it a great day, and I will see you in the next video.